Hello, and welcome to Challenge Solutions. I'm Macy, and today I'm joined with Miss Kate Haling. She was my band director from the 9th grade to 11th grade, and today I thought we would talk about kind of some of the methods that we've used when she was teaching me music, and what worked, what didn't work, and kind of how that changed through the years. So this video is going to be a lot more conversational as opposed to our normal tips videos, but hopefully it'll be helpful for any band directors and students who are planning on taking band who are out there. And also, she doubled as my choir director, so we might throw some in about that too. So if you're a music person, this is probably going to be helpful, or hopefully it is. So yeah, I guess we're going to start with kind of how we met and where we started, and we'll move up from there. So Miss Haling, I will let you take us away with that.
All right. Well, I think the first time I met you, I had been warned about you a little bit. Not necessarily warned, but everybody was like, hey, just to let you know, you've got a blind student who's really interested in music, and we just want to give you a heads up so you can start preparing to adjust for her. But don't worry, she's super, super smart. She picks up on things really fast. And I was like, okay, great. So I'm super nervous. I want to make sure that I'm as inclusive as possible. And she walks into the band choir room, and she opens up with a blind joke. So that was the best way, I guess, to make me feel comfortable. I was like, okay, great, I can work with a student. But I think the best thing about our student-teacher relationship was how well we communicated, or at least attempted to as often as possible, because I always wanted to make sure I was doing what was best for you, right. And you were never afraid to let me know exactly what you needed, which was very, very helpful. Mm-hmm. So having open communication from the start really helped. So I think from the beginning, you and your previous teacher, she was also a horn player.
Yes. You
two would sit down, and I think she would play some for you, and you would play it back, or she would just play it and record it. Teaching-wise, what do you remember about how you were learning it first?
Yeah, so it was a lot like that. We would, a lot of the times we would play during our lessons, and she would play, like, something for me, and I would play it back, or she would sing it to me, or tell me, like, you have a quarter note F and a quarter note G, and whatever. So she was working in, like, the music theory, or, like, written music a little bit, I guess, into it, but we would just kind of record that so that if I went back to it later and needed it, I had it. But the thing was that I was a beginning horn player, and I was out of tune, and I was super nervous, so a lot of the times that didn't end up like actually being beneficial. I know we did that a couple times too, with you trying to teach me things and then us record it. So we ended up actually switching to, like, especially with Miss Haling, you would record everything, like you playing on a piano, and of course pitching it down a fourth, and then I would, like, learn from the recordings and listen to the recordings, and then during our lessons we ended up kind of like touching up, and okay, but did you get this dynamic marking, or you're not playing this here or that there, and that worked really well for a long time.
And this was all before we had really had access to physical Braille music, right?
Right, because I had taken the Hadley course, which is no longer available, so I've had several people ask questions about, Hadley. They are no longer offering a music program, but that is how I learned Braille music. But then we'd faced a problem of, how do we get this to me? And that was with my first band director. We hadn't really gotten there yet. I wasn't there as a player, and she had a lot going on, of course, because she left her job here when I'd only been playing for a year and a half. So, I think we just didn't get there. And then when you came, it was also your first year teaching.
Yes.
So we didn't get that until we did, and that actually really changed my life as a musician, having that access to music. So I'll go ahead and let Miss Brown explain kind of where we started with Braille music, and hopefully that will help with any band directors out there that have questions.
Yeah, so we had ended up, when it came for you to learn music, I was playing on the piano, and I was singing note names for her. So it was basically recordings of notes and rhythms in kind of small chunks. And I remember talking about form a lot.
Yes.
To help you remember. And then, like Macy said, we would try to put that together and clean it up in lessons. Now, as a student, you progressed especially being in band and choir, you progress very quickly. So we got to the point where I was like, oh, I want her to be in all these competitions with us, and I want to send her to individual competitions as well. And in the state of Arkansas, for the most part, every competition, you need to have the skill of sight reading. And that's a skill, of course, as a director of any group, you want to practice sight reading skills with your students and make them much better musicians. So we were doing this in band, and we were starting to do it in choir. So that really brought up the challenge of, okay, how can I include Macy without giving her any information, because I can't give her any information about the music to help her with sight reading. Otherwise, it's not really sight reading. She had to do it 100% on her own. So I was happy to hear that she'd already learned how to read Braille music, and I looked at it myself and realized that learning it was not really my way to go.
Yes. Just a note for band directors, you don't have to learn it. Please don't try to learn it. I promise it's going to be more trouble. I've had a lot of people ask me about that too. There are better ways, and we're going to get to that.
Yes.
Before we do, I want to mention, I know a lot of this is going really fast, and we have multiple points of view. I do have a tips for band directors video. If you want to check out some of the more like, you know, how to recording in small chunks, like Miss Haling said, is definitely the way to go if you have a student. And I talk about how not every blind person has perfect pitch, so you may have to say those note names. A lot of that is specified in that video, and I'll link that in the description too if you want a more straightforward kind of, here's a list of things you can do. But I just thought that was worth pointing out since we're kind of having more of a conversation about it. But yeah, definitely, sorry, back to Braille music. Yeah, you don't have to learn that. So resources, where we started.
Okay, so I think one day your TVI, Miss Teresa, super sweet. She was just like, oh, by the way, we have Dancing Dots. It's a Braille music program. We have that. And I was like, okay. So unfortunately, all of this software was on her office computer at one campus at the elementary. And of course, Macy's at the high school. So that in itself was a challenge because I had to access somebody else's computer all the time for off hours. And these programs are very, very expensive. And once you download your copy, that's kind of it. That's where you want it to stay so you don't lose it. So long story short, I spend a lot of time in her office on this computer, doing a lot of research, making lots of phone calls to Dancing Dots. They were very, very helpful, by the way. And eventually figured out how to print off a physical copy of Braille music for Macy. And there were a lot of steps involved. And I have typed up a very detailed order, a process of things that are needed to be done to successfully print a piece of Braille music that is readable for your student.
Can you put that on our blog?
Yes, I've got it right here. So I'm going to touch on some high points, and yes, we can upload that to the blog and maybe leave a copy down below. So,
all right, challengesolutions.org. There'll be a link to this in the description if you want it.
Yes.
If you're using Dancing Dots. And I also want to add to that, that instance of us having it on a single computer. If you're coming to a new school with a blind student and they have that program at all, that's probably what you're going to experience. You may be spending a lot of time in some dark room where they kind of left the program and forgot about it, and then they have it and you're not going to be able to get it on anything else. Ours was actually loaned from another school, so that made everything even more complicated. So expect that. In this process, it took us weeks. I mean, the first time we did it, we got complete gibberish on the paper. Of course, I was just there to read everything. Miss Haling was doing all the work.
There were a lot of computer settings. I had to get our tech guys to come in and change permissions. Mm-hmm. And every time I went to go print off Braille music, I had to go into the computer and change the settings for the printer. And then when I was done, I had to change everything back. And that changing the settings itself and finding permission to get there took a week in itself.
Oh, yes. We were using a Tiger embosser, and there were some weird things that we had to change to make everything work. I think we actually found it online, didn't we?
Yes.
So
yes,
I can link that video also if you are using a Tiger, because I think it has some weird special things that other embossers don't have that you have to change, and I'm not sure why. So, yeah, we had to figure all of that out. But we did, and we're going to talk about the rest of the program.
Right. So Dancing Dots in itself is kind of like a bundle of programs, correct?
Yes.
So to use the Dancing Dots suite, you have to have all of these programs, and they work together. So here are the software programs that you need in this Dancing Dots suite. There are three software programs that you'll use in this order to upload some music to get it to emboss. So the first program you'll use is called SharpEye. This is the program that will scan the music, it will read it, and allow you to edit the music. So I simply just put the music into the scanner that was connected to the computer. I opened this program and I scanned the document. Once that image was in the program, I could edit any mistakes from the scanner. And this was a very important step. Otherwise, once it got into the next program, if I didn't correct something, sometimes I was not able to correct it later on. Mm-hmm. So after saving it into SharpEye, fixing all the mistakes from the scan, it goes into a software called Lime. Lime allows the sighted person to edit the music. It's a music editor, but it's one that's compatible with the next piece of software. So these three software programs I'm talking about, they're really only compatible with each other, and they have to work together. So once the music is in Lime, I'm able to edit it. So Lime is not accessible for blind users unless you have Lime allowed. So if you have a blind student and you have Lime allowed in your program, they might be able to, on their own, scan the music, get it into SharpEye, and then use Lime allowed to help them navigate Lime and edit the music. But of course, they would need to know what it's supposed to sound like and look like.
Right. See, that's where the problems really come in because, I can't look at the sheet of music and then scan it and fix the differences, which is kind of where a lot of blind students, like, in the end, no matter what you use, it's probably not something that the student's going to be able to do independently unless they are just really familiar, in which case, there's not really a need for it, so.
Right. So this whole process really works best with a sighted person or sighted teacher to help. So once the music has been edited in Lime, you can then save it and send it to a program called Goodfeel. The job of Goodfeel is to take this music notation and translate it into Braille so that it can be embossed and printed out. So these three programs are what is included in the Dancing Dot suite and work together. So SharpEye scans in your music. It goes to Lime, which edits your music and you make corrections. And then to Goodfeel, which translates the music into Braille so that you can emboss it. So in the document that will be uploaded to the blog, I've got a much more detailed process on how to prepare everything, the settings you need to change to make it happy enough to print, and things to watch out for. So we'll be uploading that and putting that out there for all of you guys to look at, and hopefully you'll find it helpful as well.
Yes.
So once we finally figured out this brailing process, I was able to spend several hours on the weekends and after school getting all of her music ready. I really tried to prepare ahead as much as I could. I had the next concert prepared and pretty much picked out almost before performing our previous concert on things like all region music and music for individual competitions. As soon as I could get that music, I would braille it for her. I also did things like chorales and our rhythm exercises later on. Yeah. So little things that we were using in class every day that she was having to be left out on. I finally got to include her in all of those things. And it took some time and it took some adjustment, but once we got it going, I think it was very helpful. What's your experience with the printed Braille versus learning the other way?
Yeah, so the print music was definitely a huge thing for me because for the first time I was able to, see what everyone, I was able to feel what everyone else was seeing. And that was big for me because I always loved, the rhythms. One thing that we would do is like counter rhythm. So if we had, I would say 1, a 2, and 4, and that's how we did kind of the beginnings of my rhythm knowledge and things like that when I was using the recordings. So I had the knowledge, but I had never really had to apply it because when you're listening to a recording, it's given to you. They're singing you the notes, they're singing you the rhythms, and you don't really have to focus on, okay, this would be a quarter note, this would be a half note, except for when you got trickier rhythms. And when that did happen, like when it was extremely syncopated, it was harder for me to follow along with the recordings and understand what was happening and what I needed to be playing when. But with that music right in front of me, it was a huge difference because I could tell, oh, this rhythm is and, or whatever, that's just straight up beats. But, whatever that rhythm was, I was able to decipher it myself and really understand how it fit into the layout of the measures and the rest of the piece. Also, it's nice because having music in front of you when you're sitting in a rehearsal, especially when I went to like all region clinics and things like that, it was super nice because when the director says, okay, turn to section B, I have that music there and I don't have to think what part of that recording was section B. I can just think about like putting my hands on the page, feel a couple measures of it, and then I know where everyone's at. And I always have that there as a reference for when I needed it. So that was absolutely huge for me. It really did make me such a better musician to just have that and be counting it and be looking at the music like anybody else would. But there's only one problem, and that was that, well, actually there were two problems. The first one was that Miss Haling was spending hours of her free time in my TVI's office trying to get all this stuff brailled for me. And the second problem was that we never did figure out, and granted we were using an older version of the Dancing Dots program, so this may be changed now, but when we had it, we never did figure out how to get that music into an electronic Braille format. So even though I had a Braille note taker, which is like a Braille computer, it has a Braille display and you read it one line at a time, and it's very compact and easy to carry. So even though I had one of those that I would have liked to have all my music on, I still was carrying a huge big binder of Braille music to school every day in my backpack and taking it home. And then if I accidentally spilled coffee on that was just a piece that we had to start from scratch with again and go to the TVI's office and Braille it. And print music gets damaged too, obviously, but that's as simple of, oh, here's the original, go make a copy. Whereas in my case, that it was not. So it was really bad, and I always worried about, getting something on my music or folding it to where I couldn't read it or something like that. So we were really looking for a way for me to get that electronically so that I could just have one device and not have to worry about that.
Right. And I'm sure, as you guys know, Braille embossing paper is much bigger than a regular binder.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure it was hard to take back and forth because it was sticking out everywhere. And then there was the dilemma of, now luckily you play French horn, so you only need one hand to do the notes, and the other hand's supposed to be in the bell, right?
Right.
But can you talk about the challenges of trying to play and read at the same time? Was that a possibility for you at all? Was it helpful, or how did you navigate that situation?
So, with paper Braille, it was awful. Because, so yes, it is possible when you're playing a French horn to, I wish I had grabbed mine, but I'm not going to get it now, to, prop the horn up on your knee, hold it with your right hand and hold it up and take your left hand and put it on the stand and feel across the binder while you're trying to play with your right hand. You're so out of tune. I was lipping everything so much. It was really bad. And then also on paper, if I ever lost my place in the music, it was basically hopeless from that point because there's so much on a sheet of paper. Whereas when we switched, we ended up switching to a different program entirely that allowed us to get it, which we were going to talk to. And when I had it on my Braille display, you're actually seeing one line at a time. So whatever line I had on the display was the line that I needed to be reading at that time. And then you hit a button to, go up and down. So it was a lot easier for me to navigate the music, to read the music and follow along when I didn't have so much where if my hand slid down a line, I was reading, 4 measures ahead.
It was definitely, it was a lot more efficient. And there's another point I want to bring about that when it comes to competitions. Now, since I was brailing all this music for her, the goal was to get her to participate in state competitions like all region and all state. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, it was kind of a fight because you do have the issue of sight reading. And as a judge, I know when I show up to all region, we all go sit in a room and you find your group and you all bring sight reading and you choose right then and there, 10 minutes before the auditions start. and then you take it to the room, you set it face down on the stand, and that's when it happens, you know. That doesn't work for a blind student. If it takes me several hours to Braille a piece, a minimum, let's say 1.5 to 2 for just a couple lines, depending on how happy the computer and the programs are that day, or how many accents or extra words or tempo markings are in this little line. Every little word or symbol that a sighted person sees on the music takes a couple of extra minutes when it comes to Brailing. So obviously that was an issue. So I can talk about ways that we work that out later, but Macy's not the only blind musician in Arkansas.
Right.
There's several others who are capable of competing. So there were several times where having a printed copy was nice. I was given sight reading music for other regions in Arkansas where I was not a judge and they knew that they had a blind musician. I would Braille that music, I'd seal it in an envelope, and I'd mail it to them, and they wouldn't open it until that day of. That they just had to pick their music early. So that was the plus of having a hard copy, is you could have something like that sealed in an envelope. But like you said, when it came to competitions and time, it was extremely time consuming, and mistakes were easy to make, and I couldn't find them. And if it was like one pitch off or the rhythm was slightly different, she's not going to know unless it sounds bad until after she learns it and plays it.
Yes, and also with that all being said with the printed music, another advantage of it is that not all students have the technology that I have. I have a Braille note taker and I'm very fluent in technology. So if there's a way to do something that requires less paper, that's going to be the way that I choose. But all that being said, not all students have the technology, and not all students like the technology. Not all of them have the resources to learn how to use the technology that I have. So, you know, in cases like that, handing someone a sheet of paper that they don't have to turn on and navigate to the file and find it and worry about crashing and bugs, because if you haven't caught it from all that we've said in this video so far, a lot of assistive technology for the blind is just riddled with bugs and glitches that you have to figure out how to navigate. So if you have a student who, you know, doesn't use technology, doesn't have technology, isn't fluent in technology, this paper Braille unfortunately may have to be, you know, the option that you go with to give them what they need musically.
Yeah, but as you said, it made you such a better musician and kind of like opened your eyes.
Oh, yes.
Yes. To a different side of music. So even if paper Braille music is the only way to go, it's so much better than not ever having it. When you think.
Absolutely. Definitely.
But let's jump to the more technology side of this.
Yes.
Because Brailling music takes a lot of time. And fortunately, our TBI Miss Teresa, again, one day was like, oh, I think there's a website that will do it online for you. And we were like, what? Whoa, mind's blown. And there is, and this, again, is on that resource document that we will be uploading. And at the bottom, it has a section called Making Digital Copies. So for this, we use a website called tobyrush.com. So on this website, you'll find a link that says Braille Music Resources, and he has more than just what I'm going to talk about today. So it's something else for you guys to explore. So he has this program called Braille Muse. Braille Muse, M-U-S-E. So once you click on this, you choose your language, and you have a page of settings that you can change if you wish. And I think for you, we only changed 2 settings, right?
Yes.
So those 2 settings were the print format. Now, it's not actually printing, but it's just kind of the format of the page when it sends it to her Braille sense.
Yes.
So these settings will change depending on student preference and the amount of cells their reader is formatted to read. So that setting is in there, and that's something to look at. And then the second one is symbol selection. Adjust the measure number indicators as needed, and change expression mark to provide with 3, 4, 5. So this has to do with how you learn to read Braille music, correct?
Yes. It's kind of an option to condense things like crescendos, decrescendos, and words that are written in the music. Those are written with a dots 3, 4, 5 in the Braille code, and you could condense it to take those away, but I like the clarity of having that. So that would just be something to discuss with your student. If they're a fluent Braille music reader, they will be able to tell you what they would prefer for you to do.
Right. So all of these settings are really to the preference of your student. You don't have to change any of them for it to work properly. So what you'll need to do from here is you'll need to upload a .xml file. So a .xml file is something that I use all the time as a musician and an educator. Anyway, this is not specific to Braille music or any of those programs that we talked about earlier. If you use any type of music notation software, this is Sibelius, this is Finale, this is NoteFlight. After you are done notating your music in that software, you can choose to save it or download it as a .xml file, and this is what you'll need. So in terms of preparation, I still had to type up the music, but I got the luxury of doing it in a program that I already use every day. I'm typing up things, new parts for other students that I'm rearranging because we had a tiny band, or I'm typing up sight singing exercises for choir. So if you are a musician, I'm sure you are probably already fluent as an educator in one of these music notation softwares. So I would take her music, I would type it up in that software. Took a bit of time, but less time consuming and a lot more comfortable than those other programs. I would download it to my computer. So now that I have her music file ready to go, I would upload it to this website's software, the Braille Muse. After I uploaded it, all I had to do was click run and download, and it took that XML file and it translated it into a .brl file. So all I had to do from there is attach this to an email and send it to Macy, and she can open it right on her Braille Sense and read it line by line and tell me exactly what it says. So how would you compare reading off your Braille Sense to paper music?
Reading on my Braille Sense was definitely better for several reasons. Of course, the thing about like reading one line at a time that I talked about, so you're never getting lost on the page. But also when you put that into a Braille note taker of any kind, whether that be a Braille Sense or a Braille Note, whatever your student is using, you can apply commands that you would use in, like, say, Microsoft Word. So you could hit space with the letter F, and that will allow you to find anything in that document. So if I'm looking for measure 207 of a stupidly long piece, then I can hit space F, 207, and then boom, I'm at that measure. So there's no scrolling and feeling and page turning and all that stuff while you're trying to just find your place in rehearsal. Because something that you have to remember is that Braille takes 3 times as long to read and process as print does. So, for me to figure out what's on the first line of this page that I turned to in my binder, that may take 5 or 6 seconds. And by that point, the band is breathing and, you're saying 1, 2, ready, go, and I still haven't found my measure, which, you obviously specifically didn't do that because you always waited. But as far as a band director in rehearsal, anything that a blind student can do to save a couple seconds is worth it. So that was one of the big pros of using it on a note taker. Something, though, that I should point out about having this electronically and digitally is that whatever device the student is using does have to be capable of reading a BRL file. So I've had people try to use Focus 40 Braille displays. Again, if you are blind or visually impaired or work with the blind or visually impaired, you'll know what those are. And if you're a band director and your student says, well, I have a Focus 40, that's not going to work because that device is not capable of reading a BRL file. So that is one thing. It can't just be a refreshable Braille display. It has to be a Braille note taker. And again, your student and your TVI, they're going to know what the difference in those is. But if, they are coming to you with like a Braille device and they just can't get it to work, it's probably because it's not capable of reading that type of file. But that file is super common. It's what our textbooks and stuff come in. So, anything that they're using to read textbooks and things like that on device, it'll probably be able to read it. So that's worth noting. But overall, having it digitally, it saved me a lot of space in my bag. It saved me a lot of time reading and finding my place wherever I was. And it saved me a lot of worry and panic about, like, am I going to fold my music on accident? Am I going to spill something on it like I mentioned earlier? For me, that is definitely the better experience. There are, of course, still the bugs that come with using a note taker. And for some reason, just a random thing to note, whenever you use the Braille Muse, at the top of the file, it'll spout random things like credit dump. And I don't know what it means. Don't worry about it. The music will be fine. There are a couple weird formatting things that it does with the music, but it was nothing that I couldn't figure out knowing the code. Nothing was altered to the point that I didn't know what it was trying to do, but a couple things aren't exactly done to code. So that is, something to note, that Dancing Dots does stick pretty closely with the actual Braille music code, but in my opinion, it isn't worth it. It's not worth, carrying those papers around and flipping through them in rehearsal and having huge binders. I was in a symphony also at that time, so then I had 2 huge binders of music, and if I didn't have one with me, I couldn't practice any of that music. So definitely digitally, in my opinion, is the way to go. But again, all this is a conversation that I feel like needs to happen between band directors and their students. Like you said at the beginning, the reason why we were able to be so successful was that we were very open in communicating with each other. If we had a question, either of us, about what was working better for the other, we would ask it, and then we would give an honest answer, and that's super important as a director, as a student, as a TVI who's working with a director, because ultimately that's what's going to let you figure out what's going to work best for you and, your team, because it is a team. It takes multiple people, so.
Yes. Speaking of the little bugs with Braille Muse, keep in mind that Braille Muse is a free online service that could be taken down by the owner at any time, and I think all the benefits of it outweigh the little bugs that were there. And like you said, as a more advanced musician and just as a fluent Braille reader, like those were very, very small things to overcome.
Definitely.
And another plus of using of Brailing digitally and sending it to you digitally, I could do it from anywhere. So for an example, one of the competitions that we went to, I believe it was ASU Honor Band.
I think it was the All-Star Honor Band.
The All-Star Honor Band for Arkansas, the ASBA, or Arkansas Small Band Association, All-Star Honor Band. So this is similar to our region group where students audition and then get a chance to perform in a larger ensemble. Well, because Arkansas has some very rural sections and Calico is a very small 1A school, the opportunities quite aren't equal as to the part of Arkansas that I grew up in. I went to a 7A school when 7A existed. I had 300 other students in my band in like a clarinet section of 30. So a much different experience here, but just this organization gave that same opportunity to schools that were just 3A and smaller, so some students had a higher chance of getting the same experience as those in much larger schools of participating in a region-style ensemble. So, fortunately, this is one we were able to participate in.
Yes.
And I had contacted the director of the auditions beforehand and said, hey, I've got a blind student. She's a really, really good player. What can we do to make this audition accessible for her, because I know there is sight reading. And I had mentioned brailing it ahead of time and all these things, and he was like, well, since you can Braille it digitally, why don't you just bring a computer, and after the horn people pick their sight reading music, we will let you Braille it for her right then, and then you can just send it to her right before her audition. And I felt like that worked out very well, and she also got extended time, just like for testing, you got 3 times the amount of extended time, right?
Yes.
To give her time to read. So music works the same way. Music is a language. If the sighted students got 20 seconds to study their sight reading, then Macy got a full minute to study her sight reading.
Yes.
And they also allowed that, and it was really nice. So just communication, and then being able to just bring my laptop, type up that sight reading really fast, send it to Macy as a Braille file right before her audition. You got to stand in the hallway and study it, and then sight read it just like everybody else. How do you feel that experience went?
I feel like that went really well, just getting it then, and then like Miss Haling said, I stood outside, so the judges didn't know that there was anything different about my audition. I just started reading earlier and memorizing all of that, and that was really nice. I will also say that if your student does not read Braille music and they are learning via recording, because that can be good for, beginning musicians, it may be worth going ahead and letting them do those honor bands and at least participate in the audition and the experience of playing those etudes for someone. Granted, so the horn section, of course, is not typically super competitive. There aren't too many horn players out there, but I know that before we had everything straightened out with Braille music and sight reading, I actually auditioned and went to that honor band. And I took a 0 in the sight reading portion, which, you know, you never want to do, but if your student, if that means giving them an opportunity, sometimes it's worth it. I ended up coming 3rd chair in the horn section, and that honor band clinic was actually probably one of the best music experiences of my life. I'm so happy that I did it in the long run, and I was, you know, so frustrated when I started because about, you know, taking, passing on the sight reading and everything, but it was definitely worth it. So if your student is in one of those smaller groups where you can get away with that and still make it into the ensemble, I do recommend doing it anyway because it's a really good experience. And then, yeah, sight reading with the digital music was also a good experience. If you have that, it's good to give your student. It's a real, you know, can you read? Can you get all these rhythms down in this amount of time and do it all by yourself? And it definitely helped me as a musician.
Yeah, and I would say doing it that way, sending it to you right before your audition, it was just as fair as a sighted person auditioning.
Yes.
Because and it was even harder for you because you still had to memorize it.
Right.
And when we used the same method for practicing sight singing in choir, I always thought you did very well with that too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I guess, with these resources, if you have these resources available to you and are able to learn the processes, that really opens the doors for your blind students to give them every opportunity and to be as equal as they can be with your other sighted students. And I think without these resources, there would have been a cap on Macy's learning, not for her lack of ability, obviously, but because there's only so much you can do.
Right.
Before the playing field becomes unequal.
Yes, definitely. Something that we do have to point out, though, is that I learned music from a program that is no longer up and running. You can't take that class. I believe the books from that class are going to be coming out soon for digital download for your students, but Braille music is also still very difficult to learn, and without that, there are not many resources available for people who are looking to learn it. So if you have to start your student off with recordings and not give them that music, that's okay. You just have to be sure that you explain to them, you know, okay, now they still need to know that a quarter note gets 1 beat and a half note gets 2. And then hopefully, you know, we'll be able to get more resources like that out there. We're hoping to have some coming out on Challenge Solutions, so stay tuned for those. But in general, I think, again, it comes down to what can your student do, what resources can you get, but in the end, if it's possible, I definitely think the digital downloads are the best way to go if you can work that out with you and your student.
Yeah, and maybe we can do another video walking you through even a recording of what it would sound like if I recorded something for her to learn orally, because even when it got to the end of the year, we still used that method as like a quick learn.
Definitely, especially in for vocal music, for choir, just for like the concert pieces. I would say you don't have to Braille all of that, because in the end, it was easier for me to learn via the recording, singing and matching pitch.
Brailing music with words is a whole different area we won't have to talk about today.
Yes, we won't do that.
It's a bigger challenge.
It does get crazy. But yeah, you know, it's on a case-by-case basis. Definitely let us know if there's anything that you specifically want to see or if you have any questions. But yeah, anything else?
No, that was it. Thank you for having me. It was nice to talk about this stuff, and hopefully we can help somebody else out and give some helpful resources.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for talking to everyone and sharing your experience as a band director, because I know you definitely put forth so much effort, and you are literally the reason why I get to go to college for music and have a career, because of all the work that you put in. So thank you. Band directors out there, she's the best example that there is. So yeah, it's worth it. It's worth all the extra work. You know, I can't thank you enough for everything that you did, and for all of you guys out there, your students won't be able to thank you enough either. It's worth it. Music can change people's lives, you know.
Your students are worth it. Your students are always worth it.
Yes. So, all that being said, I think we're going to wrap this video up. If you did like it, you should give it a thumbs up and subscribe so the YouTube algorithm will continue to know that we exist. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, you can leave those in the comments of this video or in the contact form at challengesolutions.org. For more content like this, keep an eye on the Challenge Solutions blog, podcast, and YouTube channel, and thank you for watching.